ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here and to introduce you to a little bit of the history and the background of what myself and my family are doing within Portugal and how we're looking at some of the challenges that are in front of us in the global wine industry. Just to start and give a brief history of the background of port and what we are in the Douro region, this extraordinary place in the northeast of Portugal. Port has always been protected and incidentally extremely heavily legislated by the national government of Portugal. During the period of the better part of the last century, of the 20th century, Portugal's a very nationalist right-wing government under the Prime Minister António Salazar, the port wine region was the only independent region that was autonomous and managed by independent private companies. All the rest of the wine regions in Portugal were encouraged to become cooperatives and not to work as independently. So the wine industry in Portugal actually spent, until very recently, was very isolated from the rest of the world and from the influences of the rest of the world. This had, I'm not speaking of port wine just at the moment, but of the wine, which is why you see on this note, which is one region and two great wines, because the history of the region has been port wine, but in the last 30 years we have also started making dry red wines, and this juxtaposition is going to be a little bit the essence of what I'm going to be speaking of. The political isolation in Portugal that we had during the 20th century had its consequences, but it had one great advantage, we didn't suffer from the concentration of the internationalization of the grape varieties that many other countries have suffered, and I will speak a bit more about that. Historically, the Douro was exclusively port wine, and only in 1986, so that was just 33 years ago, after this date, were port-producing companies permitted by law to produce table wines. Before that date, we were not allowed to, by law, we could only make port wine. And then I will come on to put a bit of a picture. The Douro region in Portugal, this is the map, which has got a climate definition on it. And the Douro, the climate, it's one of the most challenging in the world. The regions vary between hot and very hot, as you can see on this map. The region accounts for over 50% of the global steep slope vineyards of the world, of which half of that, so 25% of the global steep slope vineyards are over 30 degrees in steepness. So it makes it a very difficult and challenging region to make wine in. Some regions do have a little bit of steeper slope vineyard, but very, very little. If we get on to the next one. So this is the global vineyard, and you can see the Douro Valley, the big graph in the middle, and then the yellow line is slopes over 30%. And so you see that it is a big region, but it's very, very difficult to cultivate. The Douro region itself, so the region that we see on this chart, the Douro region is 37,000 hectares, of which 16,000 is over 30% of slope. Just as an example, if the Douro is 37,000 hectares, France is 42.5, and Tuscany in Italy, just in itself, is 63,000 hectares. Bordeaux in France is 42, and Tuscany is 63. So it's a reasonably large area, but not huge by some of the other wine-growing regions. The Mosel, by comparison, in Germany, which is 100% steep slope vineyard, is only 9,000 hectares. You see Mosel is the number 3 chart, so much smaller. So the steep slope, and allied to the very dry weather conditions, this is annual precipitation rainfall in the global wine growing regions. And if you see that, and you start to see, that is the Douro in the central area, the Douro in the eastern area, and the Douro also in the eastern area. They are amongst the 10 driest wine production regions in the world. So, which brings us challenge, and the reason for this, so this is the rainfall, and then this map, you see conversely is the different way, is the temperatures of the wine growing region. And again, if we see the Douro is amongst some of the hottest regions in the world, and if we look at these two maps together, only 4 other wine regions suffer from the same climatic conditions that we suffer from in the Douro Valley in northeastern Portugal. Mendoza in Argentina, the central and eastern Douro Valley, Lodi in the Central Valley of California, and Barossa in Australia. Many other regions either have very hot growing seasons, but they have greater rainfall, or they have quite a lot of rainfall, or they have cooler drying seasons but greater rainfall. So it's a combination of the challenges, and this will come on to you'll understand what I'm saying in a moment. The result of this is that the Douro Valley has very low yields and high manual labor costs because of the mechanization on steep slope viticulture. Our yields are about 4,000 kilos per hectare compared to some of the New World regions. And here you see world grape yields from 2000 to 2014, and then the bottom line is the Douro, where you see that I've extended it for the next couple of years. We have 4,000 kilos per hectare compared to some New World regions that have yields at the top of that list, as Latin America, where you have yields of up to 14,000 kilos. If we look at this in a different way, if we compare this to a Bordeaux average yield of some 40 hectolitres per hectare, this means that they can produce, a Bordeaux property can produce about 5,500 bottles per hectare. We in the Douro, we can only produce 3,000 bottles. So we have a more expensive production, lower yields, and which makes it, so it makes us a very expensive production region relative to the rest of the world. And then I come on the next point, which builds up. We are the largest area of mountain vineyard, which has a very challenging climate. The Douro Valley has very low yields, and it is very expensive to make wine. And this is this small chart that I put up now shows us what is the production costs on a vineyard on average around the world. So if you see the top of the chart, you have the Douro costs 65 euro cents per kilo of grapes to produce. Comparatively, and then we see Spain and California, Australia, 29, 24 euro cents, and then Chile, high volume production, down to 10 euro cents per kilo of grapes. All this will become clear in a moment. Our great strength in the Douro, however, and we see it now, is our diversity, the genetic diversity of the different grape varietals that we have in the Douro region. In the Douro, in Portugal, we have 343 grape varieties that are registered in the country, of which 250 are indigenous. And this is our secret. This is the difference between the Douro and the other wine-growing regions. Of the 250 grape varieties, the Douro Valley itself, the region that we are speaking of here, has 65 red and 50 white, so has 115 different indigenous grape varieties. So the word that I'd like you all to remember at the end of this discussion is diversity, because that is the secret. As a result of this diversity, we as a family have developed and evolved a grapevine, and sorry, just to jump back, I went in front of myself. This is the density of indigenous grape varieties across 4 of the European countries. Obviously, it's very clear. If you look on the top right-hand side of that map, you're going to see Germany. That's very obvious because that's the Riesling grape, and so the country is very much dominated by that varietal. But we see in the lower down, Portugal has 2.7 indigenous grape varieties per 1,000 square kilometers. Italy, we see, only has one. You have to take that in balance, because Italy does also have a great diversity, genetic diversity, but because it is a bigger country, it is not so compacted into a small country like Portugal. But what happened is that the political isolation of Portugal during the better part of the 20th century, so the previous century, not the current one, allowed for the grape varieties to be to not be replaced by the so-called international grape varieties. So as a result of this diversity, and there wasn't a lot of research going on, we have embarked on a program which is called the Symington Grapevine Library, and we've planted 2 homogeneous experimental vineyards comprising of 53 Portuguese grape varieties, and plus a couple of a few international grape varieties that we use as controls. And each varietal has 200 individual vines planted. This allows us to make small fermentations, not micro fermentations. And so that allows us not only to make wines to just do the analysis, but now we are in the 4th year of this project, and we can now already we have wines that are aging in bottle, and we are keeping them as they evolve in the bottles. There are a number of reasons for the research that we're doing, and the main one, or one of the principal ones, is not to lose the loss of interesting varietals, and to understand the different varietals and the adaptability to climate change. Although this is still in the early stages, this is a research program that will go on for a couple of generations. Although not directly linked to this presentation, I think it's interesting, and I was mentioning it to a couple of people earlier on. One of the classical Portuguese grape varieties, the Touriga Nacional, has in the last year been authorized for planting for Bordeaux and Bordeaux Superior, for the standard wines, not for the great chateau wines, has been allowed to be planted in Bordeaux up to 15% of the blend, for the very simple reason that Southern European varietals, Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, Greek, are wines that have become adapted to, over the centuries, to hot, dry climate viticulture, and whereby many of the European classical or international grape varieties actually have come and been drawn from cooler climate wine regions, and then have been planted in very, very dry parts of the world. If you notice, remember back on those 2 charts of the rainfall and climate, the hottest and driest wine region in the world is Mendoza in Italy, in Argentina, sorry. And they have quite a substantial amount of Cabernet Sauvignon, although obviously they focus on other wines. And so I come on to it is the very diversity of the varietals which is the key to the future of the Douro wine development program. And it is this that will make the difference to us. If we have seen that, when I mentioned that Portugal, we have low yields, we have high production costs, and therefore it's impossible for Portugal or the Douro Valley itself to compete directly with the rest of the world on price and volume wines, and therefore the only thing that we can do is to focus on high quality, limited wines of top class and then we have to see when we came into this industry. The Douro, or my family, my history, is recognized for our port wine, but which we have been making for 350 years. But only in the last 33 years has the Douro wine region been making dry red wines. So if we think about the fact that even the New World, California, South America, South Africa, Australia, were entering the global wine market in the 1960s and 1970s so 50 years ago, Portugal, as one of the main European wine-producing countries, actually only entered the global wine industry 30 years ago. And therefore, we have come to the party very late, and we also have, and we are coming with unknown grape varietals. So, although we have a unique history, the wine regions are producing with individual grape varieties. I go down to the grape varieties. Global wine production is based on 10,000 known vitis vinifera grape varieties. However, of those 10,000, only 33 make up 50% of the global wine world, which is very, very small. And then of those 33, with 50%, 13 account for 1/3. So it shows how limiting really the global wine industry is just on a very, very few grape varieties. If we go to that 1/3 of the grape planted vines around the world, Cabernet Sauvignon is the second most planted, Merlot the fourth, and Tempranillo the fifth. The first is a grape variety that is made exclusively for table grapes, and the fifth is a grape variety that is called the Arienne, which in fact is planted primarily for brandy production in La Mancha province in central southern Spain. And then with the white grapes, Chardonnay is 7th and Sauvignon Blanc is 11th. This shows that they are 4 grape varieties that essentially account for 1/3 of the global wine industry. Sorry, 5. 3 red and 2 white. Which, while the development of generic grape varieties, and this is possibly a little bit controversial to say this, wines labeled as Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot or Tempranillo or whatever it may be, and particularly with the whites with Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc, they have been amazing at developing and creating a global wine industry, and they have given security to new consumers that are coming in and want to know about wine, and they have learned that to have one of those labeled grape varieties gives them a guarantee of a style of wine that perhaps they enjoy. But at the same time, it has been quite limiting from a global wine industry point of view, because it means that we're in danger of losing a huge amount of our global diversity. And Sandro is sitting here in front of me, and Anatoly also, from an Italian point of view and from a Georgian point of view, both of the countries that champion indigenous and diversity in grape varietals. But we are, from a global point of view, I personally believe we are in quite a delicate position where we are losing a lot of the potential of interest and the diversity, the originality of the wines that come from individual countries. So how do we do this, and what do we do from the Douro wine region in the north of Portugal, where we don't have a huge history? We're quite expensive wine producers. We don't have access to the global market, so the wines they're not inexpensive, and so the only thing that we can do is to focus exclusively on the development of quality wines, with our indigenous varietals, trying to make them more original and give them a better feeling, a better attractiveness to the consumer. How does Portugal develop and introduce its wines to the rest of the world? If we think about from a European point of view, France is perhaps the sort of the one of the regions that most people look at as the reference in wines around the globe, and that we see that. The other two countries that perhaps have, from a European point of view, that have the greatest impact on a global point of view are both Spain and Italy. And a large part of the diversification of their wines and the introduction of their wines around the globe have been done behind the gastronomy and the physical migration of people. There isn't a city in the world that doesn't have a pizza restaurant. There isn't a city in the world that doesn't have a tapas bar. And as a result, the wines from those countries have grown they have been divulged to us here in this room and people around the world, partly because of just the physical migration of the population that have taken their culture, taken their gastronomy, and taken their wines to the countries around the world. Portugal was an isolated country. It was quite difficult to emigrate from the country. It isn't that well known from its gastronomy, although it does have a great gastronomy. But that has been a limiting factor, and we've also been, because of our political isolation, we have also been limited from our access to the global market. So we now need to go out into the global market and to start trying to develop our business. And again, how can we do that? Portugal is not a low-cost producer. How do we develop that? And that the only way we can do that is to follow a route of high quality. Sorry, my screen isn't working very well. Of high quality wines with proven provenance and a history. This is just two pictures actually of our grape variety library. The map that I showed just previously we have two locations, one in the east and one in the central regions of the Douro, where we are doing this our grape variety library. And so how do we, this is the grape varieties that we've done. You'll see at the bottom we've got a few international grape varieties, which are the global varieties where we can do research and control and controls from a viticultural point of view, from a technical point of view. Anything that happens, there's been a lot of research made on those classical grape varieties. They're not, so they act as a control. And I think that and this is just maturation studies, the days of the year from when they start. So it's the sort of research work that we're getting. And we can see from a climatic point of view. And to come back to the point, and then I'll put myself open for questions from the floor, is that we see here, how can we compete in the global world? And the only way we can compete in the global world is not on price and it's not on volume, but it has to be on quality. And my family has been absolutely single-minded for the last 30 or 40 years of making our wines of only to be considered. We don't want to make large quantities, but what we want to do is to make the best reference or the best ability of quality wine from the individual region that we come from for our region. And I think this probably says it all. Being considered the best wine in the world, the number 3 wine in the world in the same year, so number 1 and 3, getting 98s and 99 points for our wines. We consider it a disappointment if our wines get less than 95 points on the global scales, which I'm very happy to say is an extremely rare occasion. So the way that the Douro and Portugal as a whole can develop its wine industry has to be through celebrating the diversity of its grape varieties, and therefore make something be recognized for their difference rather than trying to compete with some of the very low-cost, high-volume yield production countries. I then just put, to seduce you, a few rather nice pictures of one of our vineyard properties in the eastern valley of the Douro region, and just to show you, some of you I know in the room have been there and visited and had the opportunity, but that's the sort of thing you see when you wake up in the morning. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's a rather quick sort of way through, but if anybody has any questions or would like to ask, I'd be very happy to answer them.
Ну что ж, у нас... Спасибо. Thank you. Что ж, у нас вопросы сейчас. Если кто-то из зала хочет задать вопрос, вот Анатолий Корнеев жаждет.
Я попытаюсь немножко раскачать, если хотите, аудиторию. Мы еще не все, наверное, проснулись. Доминик, Я думаю, что поскольку здесь в зале присутствует большое количество российских виноделов, наверное, будет мой вопрос первый касаться именно их ремесла, а не ваши коллеги по цеху. Итак, мы понимаем, что Португалия не очень простая страна, похожая на Россию в том смысле, что долгое время она была в изоляции. С другой стороны, мы понимаем, что это не самая лидирующая экономика в Европе. Здесь трудности с климатом. Очень многие факторы напоминают нам то, с чего сейчас начинает наша отрасль свое развитие. Могли бы вы назвать 3 самых основных фактора успеха, поскольку у вас есть уже прекрасный опыт все-таки прорыва, и российский рынок с точки зрения потребления португальского вина, не только порта, но вшире всей категории вина, является таким, наверное, как раз подтверждающим этот успех рынком, потому что только за последний год потребление португальского вина в России увеличилось, внимание, на 360%. Что нужно делать?
Thank you, Anatoly. I think it's I think it's very important that we recognise that we have to. We believe, and my family is that the difference is where we have to make our point, because to try to, as I think I tried to explain a little bit in my presentation, to try to say that we can compete with Cabernet Sauvignon from 30 different countries around the world. I think that I know that in Soviet times in Russia, it was quite difficult because there was many of the indigenous grapes were ripped up, were dug up, and then they planted high volume, low quality production fruit. So it's now more difficult. But I would have thought probably one of the best things that you can do in this country is to search for those few remaining genetically original varietals that hopefully will still exist in a little village hidden away somewhere in the backyard of some local farmer who sort of managed to keep a little bit of their vineyard going in their own private garden. And because the diversity is what makes it so much more interesting. And although it's a harder path to walk, it is a more difficult road to go down. Eventually the quality of the wines and the originality and the individuality will win, because everybody is looking for something that is original. And that is very much the focus that we have been trying to make ourselves in our wine industry.
Ну что ж, спасибо, Доминик. У нас есть вопросы из зала. И первый вопрос: какой местный сорт является первым по высадке в Португалии?
I don't read Russian. No. I didn't get that. I heard you.
Окей. А можно вернуть?
I'm hearing Russian.
What's the autochthonical Portugallian grape? The
most planted in Portugal is I'm getting Russian. The most planted grape variety in Portugal is probably the what from Spain would be considered the Tempranillo. The most planted grape in Portugal is probably the Tempranillo grape from Spain, but it's the one grape that is common across the whole of the Iberian Peninsula. And this grape, and in the Douro region of Portugal, it is called the Tinta Roriz, R-O-R-I-Z. In the south of Portugal, it is called the Aragonês. And it's a grape that even within Spain has many different names in the different regions. For example, in Rioja, it is the Tempranillo, but in the Ribeira del Duero, it is called Tinta del País. And so that is probably the most commonly planted variety across the whole country. But the principal grapes from the Douro wine growing region for us are the Touriga Nacional and the Touriga Franca, and they are the two primary grapes that we use most of all.
Спасибо, thank you. Следующий вопрос из зала. Доминик, вы сейчас слышите меня? Вам переводят, прекрасно. Так, где у нас следующий вопрос? Или, может быть, есть кто-то, кто готов? У нас есть руки. Прекрасно, давайте. Владимир.
День добрый. У меня следующий вопрос по поводу, раз уж мы заговорили про местные локальные сорта, то не лучше ли для покупателя, например, когда он находит знакомый ему сорт в различных теруарах, нежели локальный сорт в какой-то конкретной стране? У вас на винодельне существуют и международные, и локальные. Как сейчас меняется производство и растет ли спрос на локальные сорта? Потому что, иначе тогда мы про автохтоны можем и не говорить. Спасибо.
Спасибо.
Thank you. We do not use international grape varieties for making our wines. For the AOC designation in Portugal, you are not allowed to use them, and in the Douro Valley. So in our experimental vineyard, we have some that are planted, but those, as I mentioned, those are for control purposes. It's like a scientific experiment, and you always have to have something. When you do an experiment, you have to need something to measure against what you are doing. And so, because there is much research that has been done on Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Zinfandel, academic research work has been done. When we have the results with our own grape varieties, we use those to compare. But we are not planting them for commercial use. They are only there for experimental and scientific use. The question that you ask about, do you use international grape varieties or why don't you use them? Because we believe in the originality and the diversity of our wines. Should we put the name on the label of the wines? We don't believe, although we do use on one or two wines, we have put the variety on it. We believe that actually, a little bit like Bordeaux, a great chateau in Bordeaux does not say what the grape variety is. Burgundy is Burgundy. I mean, we've all heard, maybe you've heard the joke that people have asked for a white Burgundy. They've asked for a Chardonnay and somebody offers them a white Burgundy and the person rejects it and says, no, I don't want Burgundy, I want Chardonnay. But we all know that white Burgundy is Chardonnay because it's not written on the label. I think that, should we put the name on the label? I personally don't believe so, because I think the integrity of the winemaker and the producer should be a sufficient guarantee that when any of you in this room see one of the wines that has my family's name on the label, you know that you have my personal guarantee behind my wine. And that is, we think, maybe more important. But then we rely on you, the sommeliers, the people who work in the wine shops, to explain, sometimes the journalists, the articles in the magazines and the newspapers, to actually communicate to the consumer in the end. But it is the guarantee of the producer rather than the individual wine that we think is more important.
Спасибо. Thank you very much. У нас еще один вопрос из зала. Прошу вас.
My name is Kira. The question is the following. Here in Russia, we actually have enough of local varieties. Some of them with a better genetics, some of them we are not so outstanding. But local producers are willing to promote them on the market. And I'm one of them. And my question is, how did you actually market your local wines when you were entering the market? I do understand that they are very high quality and you got very good results. But what was the consumer feedback when you first entered? Was it quality reason? Was it actually the interest to the local variety or the brand or the new region? And how was it met in Europe? Because it was new for Europe. And how do you see this trend of
I can answer that question in two ways. One, congratulations, and I think what you're doing is fantastic, because to try to bring back some of the original quality to genetic diversity that was available in Russia, I think is fantastic. How to get into how to communicate into the market, in one respect, we are in a luckier position and a much stronger position than you have been, because my family, I believe, and I apologize for saying this, but we are recognized globally as premium port wine producers. And we have hundreds of years of history of making top-class port wines around the world. And so when we started making dry wines 30 years ago, I think we already had, the door was a little bit open. It was already, so we had access to the market, which perhaps in your situation is a little bit more difficult at the moment. I think that the challenge of going into that market was a little bit more the question of people, they would try our wines, they would drink the wine, they would enjoy it and recognize the quality for it. But our biggest challenge is recall. People remembering that they tasted this really good wine today at table, in your house, or in a presentation with you, and then they go out 1 week or a month later, they go to a restaurant and they order a bottle and they go back to their safe, regular, everyday bottle of wine. And this is probably our biggest challenge, is to get people to change their habit every day of buying. When I go to a restaurant, I want a bottle of white wine and I buy a bottle of Chardonnay. And we need to get them, we need to get them, people, to be a little bit more open and to remember these great wines that they have tasted and not go back to where they always, to be a little bit more adventurous perhaps. But it's a big problem. What you say is that recall of the wine is a big problem, because people tend to go back to where they feel safe.
Спасибо, Доминик. Мы с вами перешли немножко к другой теме сейчас, которой вы коснулись. Это тема коммуникации. И в этой связи я хотел бы вам адресовать еще один вопрос, который касается вашей основной категории, в которой вы лидируете уже с 17 века – порта. Мы с вами сейчас находимся в рынке, у которого есть две глобальных тенденции. Первое – это переход, смена поколений. Мы уже сейчас с вами касаемся так называемого поколения Z, непростого, с которым надо будет говорить на другом языке. И второе – это тренды, которые связаны в концепции консюмеризма, в концепции потребления, связаны с отказом от сахара, отказом от высоких спиртных показателей. И как вы смотрите в этой связи на будущее порта? Мы видим с вами, что категория шерри падает, категория других десертных вин падает. Означает ли, что порта – это единственный, наверное, десертный продукт, у которого есть некая стабильность, и как вы будете коммуницировать и поддерживать этот тренд?
Very challenging question. Yes, that is true. There is that phrase that the people are speaking of today, which is low, no, either low in everything or none at all. I think that the message we try to communicate is that the quality of the wine speaks more than everything, than whether it has a higher alcohol content or whether it has higher residual sugar than other wines. I think, as with everything, we do always communicate and try to speak to our people, the people that enjoy our wines, is that they are there for enjoyment, but enjoyment should be done within some degree of control and limitation. And so hopefully that'll mean that we will that we can keep going. What we have done very much, you are absolutely correct, the global port wine sales have been more or less stable what has been happening is that the less expensive or the entry-level styles of port have been reducing, and the quality wines are growing. So the total volume of port actually has been dropping a little bit, but the revenue has been increasing because we are switching from mass market volume to quality. And that has been the philosophy of my family, that has been for the last 60, 70 years, is to change our focus very much from just producing large volume, and therefore it'll be a smaller market, but hopefully much more based on quality of wines.
Спасибо. Спасибо. Ну что ж, пару вопросов с нашей интерактивной, значит, части. Вот молодой человек из прекрасного города Ростова-на-Дону спрашивает у Доминика. Пробовал ли Доминик вина России, в частности вина из местных локальных сортов винограда? Если да, то можете ли поделиться своими впечатлениями? Как вы считаете, когда вина России смогут попасть на рынок Португалии? Спасибо, интересуется Даниил Мухаммадиев из Ростова-на-Дону.
I'm afraid I have to put my hands up and say I'm afraid I can't speak with any form of knowledge or detail on wines that have made in Russia, and it is something that I will have to make amends for. And so with my apologies, I have to say I'm literally not able to answer the question from a quality perspective point of view. Introducing wines into a global market is, as we have been discussing, isn't easy. However, there are always people that are interested in wines, and I would recommend that the best way to do it is to go for specialist retailers. Don't try to go for the mass market, large volume market. I would say go initially to the specialists that can introduce the wine from a hand-selling basis to their favored and to their private customers, and those customers will be able to little by little develop it. Particularly in Portugal, I would say that normally speaking, or the conventional wisdom in the wine industry, is you can develop your sales initially in not wine-producing countries, rather than go into a country like Portugal or France or Italy, where there is a certain amount of pride of their national production. And so, for example, even in Portugal, dry red and dry white French or Spanish or Italian wines are sold in very, very small quantities because they tend to be proud about their own productions. There's the old story that, it's virtually impossible to find a bottle of Burgundy when you're in a restaurant in Bordeaux. And so I would say that to develop your business, look into countries like the United Kingdom, the Scandinavian countries, and there, from a European perspective, and then those countries, there is a greater potential to develop the business before trying to go into the broader market nations.
Спасибо, Доминик. Есть еще один технический вопрос. Вы используете капельный полив на виноградниках? Спрашивает Виталий Недбальский.
We do use it in some vineyards, only in the eastern region, which is the driest region of the whole Douro Valley. We do it. We have been doing experimentation in the last few years. Irrigation is something that is necessary in some conditions. I think that an example is that for last year, the 2018 harvest, not the current one, we had just over 50% of normal average rainfall, and if we hadn't had any form of irrigation in these vineyards, we would have lost our entire crop. And irrigation is something that has to be, we prefer to use called water stress management rather than irrigation, because it's just it explains a little bit better what we are doing, which is to try to control the vine and so that it doesn't actually just lose the crop at all because of dehydration, and so we can control it. But yes, we do a little bit, but it's still in the experimental stages, in the early stages, but it is not common practice across the whole of the Douro wine growing region, no.
Спасибо. Но видите, сейчас появился вопрос, какие еще сорта винограда вы планируете использовать дальше. Раз сразу ответ. Вот такие вот, значит, сорта винограда на картинке. Что ж, есть ли у нас еще вопросы в зале?
Там был вопрос относительно какой сорт винограда Доминик считает наиболее перспективным. Просто сейчас картинка его закрыла, к сожалению.
I'll go back to that. Whoops, sorry. Of these grape varieties, the ones that in this initial stage that are beginning to show possibly some of the most promising is the Alicante Boucher, which is a variety that has, it's a cross from the beginning of the 19th century, from the beginning of the 20th century, sorry, in France. It's a tinturero, it's a grape with red juice, but it has very high acidity. And also it's a very late maturing variety. And so not only are we looking at the diversity of grape varieties that we have in Portugal, but I think it is a common thread around the world, and I think believed by most people in the world, that we are suffering from a form of climate change, and there is one issue that is absolutely fundamental, which is having grape varieties that will be more resistant to hotter climate. And so this is also one of the main points of interest that we are getting out of this research. But Alicante Boucher certainly is showing some great potential. The Trincadeira is a grape that has two names. Some people call it Tinta Amarela, other times it's called Trincadeira. Again, they are varieties that are more resistant to heat, a later maturing variety, which therefore means that when you make your wine, it then maintains the acidity, fixed acidity into the wine, and so it allows us to develop. So it is still very much in an early stage of coming to conclusions, but those are certainly two indicators that we are already beginning to see from a point of view from the grape varieties that we have in the Douro Valley.
Спасибо. Есть у нас еще вопрос, даже два. Прям два вопроса, и тогда уже мы продолжим программу.
Добрый день, меня зовут Сергей, у меня первый вопрос. Вы создали, не конкретно вы, я имею в виду Португалию, создали розовый порту. Какая была, мотивация создать данный напиток, для чего он был сделан? Для подстраивания рынка, поиски новых вкусов, какая была мотивация? И еще один вопрос. Поскольку ваша страна маленькая, ограниченное количество сортов винограда, соответственно, объем производства вина маленький, каким образом удается сохранять достаточно приемлемые цены на рынке? Почему другие страны завышают свою стоимость, а у вас что на Порто, что на сухие вина, которые сейчас набирают популярность, цена достаточно доступная? Спасибо.
Well, there are two very clear questions that you ask. The first one is why did you make pink port? We didn't. One of our competitors started making pink port, and I think it was an interesting development. And I think innovation is always something that is an interesting challenge. Has it been hugely successful? I would say moderate is probably the best way of replying to that question. And I think it's always in everything we do, we should always ask questions, and you should always develop something, and maybe not all of them are hugely successful. But the pink port it's got a small market of interest, but it was an experiment to challenge the convention and the traditional rules. It was a thing that was created for the Croft Port Company, which is not my family's involvement. And it's a fairly limited, fairly small and niche product. Your second question is a very good question indeed, and is perhaps one of our great challenges. That was, I think, what I tried to explain, that we can't be a low-cost producer. Before Portugal joined the European Community and then later joined the Euro monetary system, it had its own internal currency, and the internal currency was devaluing progressively against the global currencies, the main global currencies, and it meant that therefore low labor costs internally in Portugal were sustainable, because with low labor costs, devaluing currency meant that on the export market, the wine was quite competitive in price. From a global point of view today, where Portugal is a small economy, but it's now pretty stable within Western Europe, and our cost of labor is increasing, we are no longer a low-cost producer, as I think I showed quite clearly on that chart, and that in itself brings some challenges, because we can't go into the market and try to compete in the global market for low-cost wines. It's as simple as that. We have to change. Us and our colleagues in the Portuguese wine industry have to change. We cannot sell wines at, €2 and €3.50 a bottle. It's just not possible, particularly in the Douro region. In the southern Alentejo region, they can get a little bit closer to that, but it's still not. Portugal cannot be, if Portugal wants to be sustainable into the long-term future as a quality wine producer, it cannot be low cost.
Спасибо. Так, у нас там был еще один вопросик.
Вопрос, да?
Да. Давайте еще один вопрос, вот, насколько я помню, прям коротенький, и мы продолжим. Так.
Да, добрый день, меня зовут Владимир. Интересно, расскажите про игристые вина, пожалуйста. Как они у вас развиваются?
We don't. We don't make sparkling wine, although there is quite a strong sparkling wine industry in Portugal. Primarily based around the Bairrada district, which is south of the city of Oporto, quite near the reasonably near the coast. And there is quite a big industry of sparkling wines there. They make them with the local grape varieties, and they're quite reasonable. But I would say 99% of it is for internal consumption within the country. We do not make sparkling wines ourselves at all. Although there is one called Vertis, which is one made inside the Douro region from vineyards that are located at about 650-700 meters above sea level. So they're very cool climate, and so they keep freshness and acidity in the wines. But it's a relatively small industry and primarily internal to Portugal. I hope does that answer your question, sir?
Доминик, спасибо большое. Поскольку время наше, к сожалению, истекает, я задам вам сейчас один из самых, наверное, важных вопросов, поскольку перед вами авангард российского винного рынка. Пожалуйста, сформулируйте очень кратко для них. Они смогут потом донести ваш месседж до конечного потребителя. Две категории: порто и тихое португальское вино, в котором вы в том числе участвуете. Можете для них сформулировать key selling points этих двух категорий? Почему их надо продавать и как?
Wow. To speak of port wine, I think that obviously the standard bearer and perhaps the single most famous port wine in the world is vintage port. It's a wine that needs to be aged for a long time in bottle, 12, 15 to 20 years, and then can go on almost indefinitely from an aging point of view. And the quality of the wines are absolutely outstanding. But from a wine that is more accessible, I would recommend that you think about tawny ports, which are wines that have been aged in seasoned oak casks all their life. They have not been bottled, and 10, 20 years old wines. They are absolutely outstandingly good. They are delicious. I think the secret to the tawny port is to serve it chilled. Serve it at 15, 16 degrees, not at room temperature. And then you only have one problem. Most of the time, the customer will ask for a second glass. And it's very simple. The wines are absolutely outstanding, either just to accompany, if you are a cigar drinker, to accompany cigars, or with the desserts, they work extraordinarily well, or even, best of all, just simply in the evening or after lunch with some friends, having a glass and discussing. The wines are absolutely unbeatable. And they are easy. Once the bottle is open, you can keep it for 2, 3, 4 weeks without too much trouble. And the wines are absolutely outstanding. And so that is what I would recommend that you you focus on and think about. From the dry wine point of view, I'm afraid I'm a bit suspect, but I would recommend the wines from the Douro Valley and probably some of my own wines. Possibly our best wine was that one that you saw on the chart there, which was Criseia, which is a wine that we make in a joint venture with a French winemaker, who is the family that used to own Chateau Coste d'Estournel in Bordeaux. But possibly, I mean, Criseia is a fantastic wine, but it's a little bit more expensive. I would say recommend the second wine from there, which is a wine that's made a little bit more accessible, slightly softer from a drinking point of view, but it's called Postscriptum. It's absolutely classic Douro in style. It's got all the flavor and the structure of the Douro, minerality, extraction. It's got and lots of ripe flavor fruits on it. And Postscriptum is basically, if you want to understand what is Douro wine, try this, and then you will understand what the style of the wines that we make in the Douro Valley. Anatoly, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed.
Большое спасибо, Доминик.